with no further ado, I would like to go ahead and welcome Andreas to the stage.
Hi, everyone. Wow. Is this thing on? You can hear me? Okay, good. Wow. Hi, everyone. Oh, my God. What a welcome. Thank you so much. So this is my first time in Denver for Bitcoin. Yeah. And after 3 days, I can finally breathe. So that's a lot better. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I've never really talked about Bitcoin at more than 5,000 feet, so that's a new experience for me. So let me start by getting an idea about this audience. I know we wanted to talk about Bitcoin basics, so I'm going to start with a little quiz just to get a feel for who's in the audience. So how many people here have conducted one or more Bitcoin transaction or other cryptocurrency transaction ever? All right. And how many have not ever? Okay, great. Help those people, please. So I'm going to talk a bit about some of the basics and also take questions. And if you have questions which are about more advanced topics, please feel free to ask me anything at all. We'll do a Q&A session, and hopefully that will be fun. So what is Bitcoin, and why are we here today? I'd like to start with the Genesis story and take you back to when this started. In October of 2008, a paper was published called Bitcoin, and that paper explained how the system works. And it was published under a name of Satoshi Nakamoto. And we now know that this is not a real name. We don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto is, or they are. So somebody out there on the internet came up with an idea of how to build a digital currency, and they published the paper in October of 2008. Now, they had also written a prototype software program that ran the Bitcoin software, which they launched on January 3rd, 2009, so just a few months later. And that was the beginning of the Bitcoin system. It was the beginning of the Bitcoin network. It was the beginning of the Bitcoin currency. It was also the introduction to the world of this new concept, which has now become a word that gets said on TV every single day on the financial news channels, which is blockchain, which is one of the technologies behind the Bitcoin technology. So this sounds like a weird story, right? Some person, we don't know who it is, shows up on the internet, posts a paper, launches some software. Some other people run this software as well, and this thing starts running. Embedded within the very first block that was created on the Bitcoin blockchain, there was a message. And this message was handcrafted into the Bitcoin software, and it was embedded in there for a reason. And the message is the headline from that day from a British newspaper, the Times of London. And it says, January 3rd, 2009, Chancellor of the Exchequer on the verge of second bailout for banks, or something like that. So the headline for that day, the day Bitcoin was launched, was that the British Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is like the head of the Treasury here, right, was going to start a second bailout for the banks. Now, this may have been a coincidence. I don't think it was. I think that message tells us a bit about the motivation behind Bitcoin. And part of the motivation behind Bitcoin was this idea that the financial system that has existed and hasn't really evolved much in the last 20 years isn't serving us. It's serving someone, very well, just not us. And what's ironic is when I say us, I'm looking out at a bunch of people who represent 5% of the human population, the most privileged, who have access to the most advanced banking in the world, who have access to multiple foreign currencies, who have the ability to send and receive money with their bank. How many of you here don't have a bank account because you can't get one? One. Great. The average percentage in the United States is 18%. That means 60 million people don't have bank accounts in this country. Want to take a guess about who those people are? Poor. The poor? That's a great answer. Poverty is one of the main reasons why people don't have access to financial services, but also lack of documentation. A lack of documentation may be because they don't have legal documentation. So, of course, illegal immigrants are one of the big groups that doesn't have banking in this country. But it can also be because they don't have documentation for other reasons. A lot of perfectly legal residents of this country also don't have a driver's license, or they don't have the necessary literacy or numeracy to open bank accounts. And in this country, 18%, that's the lowest percentage in the world for the unbanked. Every other country has more people who are unbanked, with some countries having more than 80% of the population having no access to banking whatsoever. But at the same time, if you talk to people in this country, you'll already realize that the banking system doesn't serve us either. It doesn't, right? The same people who are quite happy to sell a variable rate subprime mortgage to you or your parents or your brother or your children, and then walk away from a pile of debt and get bailed out. None of them went to jail. More than 1 million homeowners lost their home in the United States, right? And at the same time, while they were doing the foreclosures, they were using a technique called robo-signing, where they were signing the foreclosure documents on deeds they didn't even own. No one went to jail. They were packaging toxic securities up in a technique called CDOs that they knew were fraudulent, and they were talking amongst themselves and saying, these are fraudulent, so don't buy any, but we'll sell them to the customers. And no one went to jail. So who are they serving? Well, themselves, yes, but also not just themselves. Ironically, a lot of the people who work at banks are part of a middle class who are not being served by the banks themselves either, right? They serve the weapon dealers. They serve the warmongers. They serve the money launderers. They serve the international drug cartels. They serve the multinational corporations, but they don't serve us. And if they don't serve us here in this country, imagine how much worse it is everywhere else. If you can't imagine, I can tell you, much worse. Much, much worse. So here we are, after 25 years of the internet. The world is more connected than it's ever been. The ability to communicate information instantaneously anywhere in the world exists for a very large part of the human population. More people have access to the internet than have access to clean drinking water. More people have access to cell phones than have access to clean water. And yet, in the last 20 years, banking hasn't gotten better. It hasn't gotten more inclusive. If anything, we're backtracking. Because over the past 15 years, international finance has become a weaponized tool of geopolitics. It's being used by powerful countries to attack powerful countries in the form of sanctions, currency controls, embargoes, and other forms of economic pressure. So banking isn't serving more people, it's serving fewer people. And more countries are finding themselves in situations where, for no fault of the citizens of that country, they're under embargo or facing currency controls. And they can't transact with people in other countries. And they face calamitous economic conditions where they watch their life savings disappear overnight. And this happened to my family in Greece in the 80s, twice. And it's happened again and again throughout South America, throughout Africa, again and again and again. It's currently happening in Venezuela. It's on the cusp of happening in Turkey. It's happening in Greece again. It's beginning to be a problematic situation in Argentina, in Brazil, and a bunch of other countries. So the economic system that we have is not serving people. And the internet hasn't brought us a financial system that connects everyone together. And part of the reason for that is because modern banking has become a deputized system of law enforcement domestically and a militarized system of control internationally. Our banking is part of the domestic police system, and it is part of the international military system, just like the banking in every other country. It doesn't serve commerce. It serves politics. So back in the early days of Bitcoin, something interesting happened. It was an organization called WikiLeaks that was publishing secrets that the US State Department didn't want published. Secrets about war crimes committed by US forces. And as a result, they wanted to shut down WikiLeaks. And one of the ways they were trying to shut down WikiLeaks is by prohibiting people from sending money to support that organization. Right? So, of course, the US government first appealed to the court system to get the necessary convictions in order to stop WikiLeaks from breaking the law. Of course they didn't. WikiLeaks wasn't breaking the law, and therefore they couldn't take them to court. They didn't have the basis in law to take them to court. Instead, what they did was they pressured Visa, MasterCard, American Express, PayPal, and all the American banks and cut WikiLeaks off without any legal process. Now, at the same time, you could use your Visa card to send money to racist groups in Alabama, to send money to all kinds of atrocious political groups around the world, but not WikiLeaks. As this was happening, Bitcoin was just emerging. And within it, buried in that first block, was that little message. And that little message said to me and to many others, this is why we're doing this. This is why Bitcoin needs to exist. Because 25 years into the internet revolution in this world, we are no closer to having a global connected community in finance than we were 20 years ago. In fact, we are further. And the financial system is not getting better at serving people, it's getting worse at serving people. And with control over money comes corruption. And we all know that, right? Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And there is no more absolute power than power over money. You have freedom of expression? Great. But if I can control where you spend your money, you don't have freedom of expression. You have the freedom to vote, but if I can control who can send money to political parties and which political parties, you don't have the freedom to vote. Watch what's happening in Russia or Turkey. That's straight out of the playbook of Putin, right? Starve them of funds, no opposition. Election with only one candidate, I win. Also, democracy. The bottom line here is this. Bitcoin didn't appear in a vacuum. And for many people, it seems miraculous how Bitcoin emerged suddenly in 2009. And nobody noticed at first. It was just the purview of a few weird geeks in a few weird mailing lists. But after a while, people started noticing, and now it's become this worldwide phenomenon. And you might be skeptical, like some person we don't know invented something we don't understand, launched it onto the world, and now, my younger cousins think I should invest all of my money into this thing, and my aunt thinks it's a pyramid scheme, and I can't tell who's right. If you think about this as an investment, you may be missing the most important point, which is that what this represents isn't an opportunity to get rich, isn't an opportunity to find a new thing to invest in. It's an opportunity to change the fundamental way that finance, money, and banking works in the 21st century worldwide. And if you don't change it for you, if you don't think you need to change it for you, think for a moment about the billions of people who have no access to banking and no hope of ever getting access to banking. And then think about what happens if all of them are able to run a bank on a $25 Android phone, and what that does to our world. Some bad people are going to be able to do some transactions, and that's okay, because some billions of people, or good people, are going to be able to do some transactions. And that's how it works. And on that simple balance, we can change the world. So my interest in Bitcoin stems from two sides. On the one hand, I'm a geek. I love technology. It's so cool, and I get so excited by it that I can't sleep, and I want to read everything about it, and then I discover something else, and that's even more excited, and then I stay up longer, and I have some more coffee, and I read more, and I just get all excited. Some of you share that with me. You don't have to. It's okay. But some of you I know exactly what I'm talking about. And that's a really cool reason to be interested in this technology. It's the kind of technology you can learn about. It's the kind of technology that can lead to a computer science degree or a specialization in another field of study. It's something that you could learn as an accountant, as someone who works in insurance or finance, and it would be really useful and interesting as part of your career, just like learning how to use databases or build a website or whatever else you might be interested in technology. But on the other hand, I look at this technology and I'm interested in it because of politics. Not the politics of parties, the politics of principles. The politics of growing up as a kid in Greece and seeing what happens when money stops working. And this is an experience I don't wish on anyone. And it's an experience that is alien to Americans, at least in the modern era. And I hope it remains alien, but I'm not that sure it will. The bottom line is that money is this magical technology, and as long as it works, we don't need to know how it works, we don't concern ourselves with it, and we don't need to really worry about it too much. Because if we did, and we actually read about how money works, we'd be horrified. Surely that can't be true. They just make it out of thin air and distribute it to banks that get to lend out money that didn't exist and then charge us interest and get richer and richer. No, come on, that's a scam. That's a pyramid scheme. The dollar works on a pyramid scheme? Tell me it isn't so. If we understood modern central banking, most of us would be horrified. So it's convenient that as long as it works, we don't really need to pay attention. Well, let me tell you something. In 2008, it broke. And we didn't fix what broke. In 2008, our economy broke, the worldwide economy broke, and central banking broke hard. And it hasn't been fixed. In the meantime, since then, the world has issued almost $100 trillion in debt by some measure, all of which is money borrowed from your future retirement plans, from your future education plans, from your future healthcare plans, from the economy, right? And that money isn't going to be paid back. It's not going to be paid back. And there's a very simple reason for that. Everyone's broke. JP Morgan Chase is bankrupt. Citibank is bankrupt. Bank of America is bankrupt. Goldman Sachs is bankrupt. The United States government is bankrupt. Europe is bankrupt. The euro is bankrupt. Deutsche Bank is bankrupt. Japan is bankrupt. China is bankrupt. They're all bankrupt. They can play around with the books, hide some debt, make some bilateral agreements, shuffle shit around, pretend to bail out Greece, send the money and then backdoor it straight back to Deutsche Bank, find some other patsies, make it appear like nothing's happening. They're all bankrupt. And so at some point, there's going to be a reckoning. We never fixed anything that happened in 2008. What we did was destroy currency in order to preserve the illusion of economy. And that's going to come back and bite us. Now, you don't have to believe me. You don't have to think that this is going to be important in your life, and I really, really do hope it doesn't. But one of the reasons Bitcoin was created, and one of the reasons it's important, is because it is neutral, because it is independent, because no one can control it, because no one can change its issuance, because no one can create it out of thin air. It's ironic that when you see criticism of Bitcoin by mainstream economists, they say things like, it's not backed by anything. And really, the question you should be asking at that point, and the dollar is? Of course, the dollar is backed. But you really don't want to hear that story as to what it's backed by. Because then you have to learn some history about Henry Kissinger and the Saudis and a little deal made in 1971. Some towers fell, some nasty things happened, and we've been at war for 18 years. But anyway, the dollar is backed by something. War. To protect oil. And Bitcoin is backed by an international community of geeks. The same geeks who brought you the internet. So again, at some point, hopefully you never have to make this choice in your life because you can always have the freedom to choose one currency versus another. But at some point, you might be forced to choose between the bankers who brought you the Great Depression and the geeks who brought you the internet. And I hope you make the right choice. But then again, if you hear some of the people in the whole blockchain, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin space talk, you might think that the goal of all of this is to eradicate government money as the first step towards eradicating government altogether and replacing all currencies with Bitcoin. One coin to rule them all. World domination. I'm not of that opinion. In fact, I think the idea of having only one world currency is a bit of a throwback to our current currency system. We've grown up with a system of currency where all currencies are backed by nation states. They represent flags, right? They have wrapped up in the commercial mechanism of value a bit of nationalism and patriotism and a flag-waving person, And in each country, it's a different flag, and, they can all do their little chant. By the way, if you go to other countries, when they wave their flag, they also chant number 1. It's a bit like when you ask people, are you a good driver? And they say, yeah, definitely. And then 80% of people say they're above average driver. How does the math on that work? So we have become accustomed to a world in which currencies represent nations, and therefore they're part of this battle. It's like the world is a big chessboard, and currencies are pawns that are fighting on this big geopolitical battle. And the dollar wins if the ruble fails. It's country versus country. And in that environment, it's natural to think that currency as a system is a winner-takes-all system, or a zero-sum game, where the only way that one currency wins is by another currency losing. And that's a world in which you cut off your nose to spite your face, which is a good summary of our current foreign policy, but also a good summary of the foreign policy of the European Union, China, and Russia. We are currently engaged in currency wars, and in those currency wars, we are expected to assume that our currency, which represents our flag, is the one we should be backing. But if you stop and think about that for a second, you suddenly realize that that's not money anymore. That token is no longer representing a commercial transaction. It's not representing value for use in business. It's representing something else. It's representing some kind of nationalistic flag-waving thing that you're trying to beat the other side with. And in that environment, if that's what you know, if that's what you grew up with, then when something like Bitcoin comes along, your natural inclination is to think, oh, this one could win the zero-sum game. This one could dominate all the others. But what if that's not how it plays out? What if instead, all along, money was simply a form of language? What if we understood that money is a way for us to communicate value to each other? And as a language, there can never be one that wins. There will always be variety, because every place has its tradition and its special needs. We have languages like those of the Inuit that have 8 words for snow. They don't need that in the Kalahari Desert. So they're going to have a different language that has 20 words for sand, which they don't need in Alaska. But the bottom line is that languages adapt to the local environment, and they will always keep proliferating, and there isn't one wins. In fact, if you speak 3 languages or 4 languages, you're better off than if you just speak 1. So in fact, having variety is what gives you greater value. What if money works that way? What if, in fact, we're going from a world with 195 currencies to a world with 1,000 currencies, to a world with 10,000 currencies, 100,000 currencies? And you can use as many of them as you want or not, and you can choose at any moment in time. And then when you hear that, you probably think, well, that sounds very fucking confusing. I don't want 1,000 currencies. I can barely keep track of how many euros are in a dollar when I go on vacation to Disneyland in Paris. Well, the good news is that we're not talking about traditional paper money. We're talking about purely electronic money. And all of the world's currencies are going to purely electronic money. At which point, the difficulty of trying to figure out which currency you have, which currency the shop will take, what the exchange rate is, and how to convert them is something that disappears into your smartphone or your iPad or your smartwatch or whatever other device is holding your money. And then the fact that you have 10 currencies really isn't an issue because you don't even know you have 10 different currencies. What if we're going to a world where fully connected, instantaneous commerce is possible by anyone, anywhere, and they don't even need to commit to a specific currency, and no currency wins? Because we all win by having choice. And that's really what it boils down to. Until now, you get to use the currency of the country you were born in, and you don't have a choice. If you're an American, you also have the choice to use other currencies, but in many countries in the world, you don't. Just one. And you still have to use that one to pay for government services and pay your taxes and things like that. And you still have to play the games of geopolitics because your retirement and your education fund and your healthcare and your job and your income and all of your expenses are denominated in the currency that they're using as a weapon. Not that you wanted to be playing in those games, but you get to. What does that look like? It looks like waking up in the morning and deciding to go to the supermarket early because you know that at noon they change the prices every day. And eggs could be 30% more expensive later in the afternoon. That's what it looks like, and I've seen that in Greece, and they're experiencing that in Venezuela and Turkey today. So when you understand that Bitcoin happened in 2009, you might think, well, why? Who needs it? What are we going to do with this? Is it just about beating the dollar and having a new thing that wins everything? It's not. It's about having a choice. And for most of the people in this country, that choice isn't very important. But for the rest of the world, that choice is absolutely critical. Most people live under horrible governments that do not give them the freedom to transact with anybody, but they also don't give them the freedom to escape from whatever crazy war, attrition, trade war, currency war they're playing at the moment. Most people live in countries where it is impossible to distinguish between organized crime and organized banking. Although, to tell you the truth, the customer service from the black market organized criminal who changed my money in Argentina was a hell of a lot better than the Bank of Argentina where I tried to change it earlier. So maybe there is a way to tell the difference between organized crime and organized banking. Both are criminals. Some of them give better customer service. But if you live in a country like that, and suddenly something like Bitcoin comes into the world, not quite yet, because it's difficult to use, and not many people have the tools and the skills to use it, but one day soon, for many people, and already for some people, you suddenly have a choice. You can say, you know what? You go play your games, Mr. Erdogan. You want to try and play Russia against America in a currency and trade war, fighting over F-35s and S-400s, if you know what I'm talking about? Great. While you take the lira to trash, I'm going to take just a bit of my wealth and move it into Bitcoin, and no one can stop me because this is an internet currency that doesn't pay attention to borders. And if you live in Venezuela and your government is in a death spiral, you can say, I'm going to take some of my money and I'm going to convert it to Bitcoin or have someone send me Bitcoin from another country. And I'm going to be able to provide food for my children. And I'm going to be called a terrorist by my own government. And I'm going to break the law. And my children are going to get fed. We know of people who actually bought food on Amazon Prime, had it shipped to Colombia and smuggled into Venezuela using Bitcoin. Food. This technology gives people choice. And we already have more than 1,000 currencies that are trying to find different ways to use that same basic technology to do different things. It's a very exciting technical space which has erupted over the past 10 years and created this enormous diverse environment with a lot of exciting development going on. And at the same time, it's a giant speculative bubble with a lot of greedy people running around in circles, screaming, trying to get rich. And at the same time, it's an enormously powerful international movement for freedom and choice that can change the lives of billions. Thank you.
What do you think the people's response will be to that action? And also, I hope you have like awesome security because you're like totally a threat to the establishment. You're awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. Fortunately, you're wrong about that last thing because I'm not a threat at all. Ideas are powerful, and ideas change the future more effectively than any other thing in the history of humanity. Not people, ideas. And the good news is that Bitcoin isn't people, it's ideas. There's a lot of people behind it, but fundamentally it's an idea. And in one really beautiful way, it's an idea that has been distilled into some mathematical formulas and put together as software so that idea now runs on the internet. And it doesn't run in one place on the internet. It's an idea that has been set free and runs everywhere. And it's an idea that, now that it's a bit better understood, is so simple to implement that among the hundreds and hundreds of people who contribute to this code, there are people who could pick up this idea and recreate it in a weekend and write that code all over again in a variety that we've never seen before, which makes this idea very, very dangerous because it's an idea that's completely unstoppable. Now, governments have a problem with unstoppable things, primarily because their general application of power is to stop things. And when you talk to people in government, there's something funny that happens, which is they assume that you are questioning their authority. They assume that you are questioning whether they are duly authorized, that they have the moral authority to stop cryptocurrencies, to stop blockchains, to stop Bitcoin. I'm not questioning their authority. That's a political question which isn't very interesting to me. I'm questioning their ability. It's a whole other question. They can have all of the authority in the world, zero ability to act on that authority. How are governments going to react? I recently did a little study, which I'm going to release, a public domain, which is a mashup between the World Freedom Index, which is a score of every country in the world on civil and political liberties, which is done by an independent organization, very, very respected, backed by many international institutions, versus the legal status of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies in each country. If you lay those two maps over each other, it's a perfect match. Free countries, free Bitcoin. Not free countries, not free Bitcoin. And then you suddenly realize Bitcoin isn't being tested by governments. Governments are being tested by Bitcoin. It forces them to reveal their true colors. Countries that do not respect the individual freedoms of their own citizens are against cryptocurrencies. Countries that do respect the individual freedoms of their citizens support, or at least allow, or they think they allow, cryptocurrencies to continue. And so what's really interesting is that when you have an idea that is powerful and freeing, that idea is like a mirror you put up to your government, and you see what's reflected back. What system of government do you have? Well, here's a litmus test. How do they feel about this? Because it's an idea that's powerful and gives people freedom. This is the state today. Free countries allow the use of these technologies. It's not going to be the state forever. And the reason is that this is an idea that's very powerful and very freeing. And so even governments that appear to be free will be challenged by this test. And eventually they will fail it. They won't fail it now when things are hunky-dory. They'll fail it when they need to because their own currency is suffering. So when you see crises, there's a need for a scapegoat, right? And that scapegoat has to be something convenient. I expect that governments will not react well to this phenomenon. We've seen how the government of Turkey, the government of India, the government of Venezuela have acted. They call people who use Bitcoin terrorists. Are there any terrorists in this room? I don't think so. Ironic, of course, because the main sponsors of terrorism are some of these governments. Right back at you. But they will do that. They will use propaganda and misinformation to tell people that Bitcoin is used to buy drugs, that Bitcoin is used to fund criminal activities, that Bitcoin is used to fund terrorism. As if there's any form of money that is not used to do those things. And this is a great irony because money is a tool to convey value. And if you're conveying value, of course you're going to use it to convey value on things that are not strictly legal, or at least in this country or that country, they're not strictly legal. All money has been used to do that forever. The illegal activities themselves have been used as money. Do you know what you can buy drugs with?
Sex.
Anything. Everything. There is nothing you can't buy drugs with. So the idea that this is the problem is ironic. Governments will react poorly. They'll try to stop it. They'll fail to stop it. They'll try to demonize it. They'll fail to demonize it. Because in the end, people will see that when it becomes a choice between the future of their children and obeying a stupid law, guess what wins every time? And that's exactly what's happening in Venezuela. So I'm very positive that with the right powerful idea, we can get a world that is much more free than it is today. But it won't be without a fight. And most of that fight will be about propaganda. Let's go over this side.
What's going on? First, I've been following you since 2016. I'm from Dallas, Texas. My name is Sean. And when I found out about Bitcoin, I heard that you, when you found out about Bitcoin, you didn't sleep for like a week. You lost like 25 pounds. Is that true?
I went into a state of excitement, geek excitement, for 4 months. And during those 4 months, I forgot to eat.
Oh, okay.
And I slept 5 or 6 hours a night because I couldn't not sleep. Otherwise, I would have forgotten to do that too. Yeah, so it's true. And I did lose 26 pounds on the most inadvisable diet ever.
Okay. Yeah, and so, okay. I don't know who all knew that about you, but now everybody does. And so my question is about security. And I've listened to one of your talks about quantum computing. And you had said that we can assume that the NSA has quantum computing currently. So my question is, how can Bitcoin safeguard against quantum computing? Because once that's reached, they'll be able to essentially break into the wallets simultaneously.
That's a very good question. So quantum computing isn't a on-off thing. That's a double pun, actually. It's not like you either have quantum computing or you don't have quantum computing. The question is, how powerful is it? How many bits, how many qubits of quantum computing do you have? So the number of qubits you need to break the encryption that you have in wallets, the current set of encryption you have in most blockchains, is far greater than even the wildest speculation of what might exist in intelligence agencies. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I'm not worried about the NSA having quantum computing, because one of the things that is a very basic concept in security is the idea that if you have a very powerful secret weapon, you do not use it. You wait until you have a very good reason to use it. One way of explaining that is what happened in Coventry when the British had broken Enigma. They had the most important secret was keeping secret the fact that they'd broken Enigma, otherwise they would go change the encryption code. So to keep that secret, they had to do parallel construction. If they found out that something was going to get bombed, they had to, I don't know, capture a German soldier who knew about it and then say that he told them so that they would have a different reason. And when they didn't have a different reason, they let the Germans bomb Coventry. Thousands of people died to protect the secret of Enigma. So all I'm saying is if the NSA has a quantum computer and they really want to people not know that quantum computer, which can also break all of the encryption keys on all of the nukes in the world, all of the communication keys and all of the nuclear subs and all of the military intelligence networks and all of the commercial networks, I don't think they're going to use it to break Bitcoin, if you know what I mean. Like, that's small fish to them. The real problem becomes when you have broad commercial availability of quantum computing, but not broad enough that all of us can use it in our wallets. And there's that interim period that's a bit awkward. And during that interim period, Bitcoin needs to change its algorithms. But one of the interesting things that happens is that while you can change the algorithms on all of the active wallets, some wallets have lost keys, or the people who had those keys are dead, and they can't change the signing algorithm, which means that those wallets will get captured by quantum computers. So one of the interesting things that happens is we will know when quantum computing exists when Satoshi's coins move.
Thank you.
That's one of the reasons they'll move. Eventually, they will move, and they'll move because someone will be able to break the keys. But for the rest of the ecosystem, we can migrate quite easily to another algorithm. It's not really as big a threat as people think it is. Yes?
For your support for the whole community.
Thank you, Greg.
You spoke a little bit about the tools that are needed or the tools that will change in the space over the coming years. Can you talk about what additional tools you feel are really necessary for the space to continue to progress?
I get that question a lot, and what people want me to say is that what we really need is a combination of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and IoT that will enable us to use prediction markets to bring forth the geek rapture or something like that. And unfortunately, the answer is rather boring. What we need in order to make it easier for more people to use these things and to get broader adoption and to promote this technology and get this technology in more hands, to make it a real choice for the people who really need it. Not try to sell it to those who don't, but for the people who really need it. We need wallets. We need wallets that are easy to use, easy to understand, secure by design. And I remember a time when there was only one Android wallet, which was actually written by a German guy called Andreas, not me, and one exchange, right? Back in 2013, there was one wallet for Android called the Bitcoin wallet. Didn't need to be more fancy than that. Not much competition out there. So wallets. Wallets are absolutely necessary. Exchanges, ATMs. Even better ATMs, more so than exchanges. And ATMs in multiple languages. So my mission at the moment is in education, and I think one of the things that we're missing is that Bitcoin today is primarily an English language phenomenon, and that is a huge drawback because the places where it's needed are Spanish-speaking countries and Chinese-speaking countries and Russian-speaking countries and many other languages, not just English, certainly not predominantly English. So translating educational material, but also translating wallet interfaces and exchanges and ATMs. I mean, quite honestly, throughout the US Southwest, there should be in every single bodega, every single little convenience store, there should be a Bitcoin ATM that doesn't have a word of English on it, and that's just in Spanish, and it has one big button, and it says, send money to Mexico. And to facilitate the remittance market, where they get charged ridiculous amounts by Wells Fargo and Western Union and MoneyGram and all of these exploitative companies to send money home to their families, right? So that's just an example. These are boring infrastructure projects. They're not cool. They have no IoT or AI or quantum anything in them. And they require a lot of focus on user experience and design. They require product managers and product designers who think carefully about the experience of using that product. And that's something that most computer geeks are not that good at, especially the ones who work on protocols. So the first group of people who got Bitcoin to where it is today, by weird coincidence, are entirely unequipped to get Bitcoin where it needs to get to the next stage, which is why we need to be nicer to the people with the purple hair who know how to design a fucking user interface and get them to join our industry and recognize that it's not just about the protocol. So wallets, infrastructure, exchanges, ATMs, basic, boring stuff, and education. Education's at all levels, from the very basic things. I've had 74 of my videos translated into Spanish by volunteers. If you speak Spanish, go to YouTube and help me do more. These are really, really important projects, I think. Let's go with this side. Thank you.
Hi, Andreas. I'm
going to run a bit long on questions, if that's OK. Yes?
You were talking about financial institutions having caused many problems, that Bitcoin is combating. And I'm curious, as the blockchain ecosystem matures, these same institutions are hopping on the bandwagon. They're recreating, a lot of the same financial instruments, or have ambitions to. They haven't quite done it yet. And I'm curious what the implications are, what you think the implications are for when these guys hop on the bandwagon, and they're probably going to go a lot faster than the rest of us can, even if we as individuals have access to creating our own financial instruments on the blockchain.
That's a great question. I get that question a lot too. I'm not particularly worried because the fundamental issue here is that what most financial institutions are trying to do is take the fundamental idea and use it to do business as usual without changing the fundamental practices. And the most important thing to realize about this technology is that its main feature is a thing we call decentralization, which is this architecture, this systems architecture, which says no one's in charge, no one is in control. Everyone participates, it's a collaborative project, and the truth, the thing that gets recorded on the blockchain, is the result of a collaboration of hundreds of thousands of computers, and it's not controlled by any single entity. So they could adopt that. They could adopt decentralization as a principle, and that would make the economy far more robust. They're not going to do that. They're going to try to pretend to do that while creating something which they control, because the nature of corporations is centralization. The nature of financial corporations is even more so centralization. So as to the fact that they will be able to move faster, there is this pervasive idea that just because financial services companies have all the money, quite literally, because they made it themselves, that they can simply buy their way into the future. Fortunately for us, unfortunately for them, there are a few things you can't buy. Innovation and creativity is one of them. Right? You can't buy innovation and creativity. These large organizations, once they get beyond a certain size, if innovation arises within their company, they will strangle it within 72 hours. Probably by deciding to create an innovation committee to study it. If they see innovation outside their industry, if it's not too disruptive, they're going to buy it, embrace it, ask it to get a haircut, wear a suit, and get into a 401k, at which point all of the creative and innovative people will leave, and they'll be left with a husk of a product. Unless it's a very disruptive innovation, in which case they won't even try to buy it. They'll try to snuff it out. Now, this technique has worked for them really well in the past, because in financial services, they could either buy the disruptive competitor, sue the disruptive competitor, or their favorite technique, have the government turn off their disruptive competitor for them by making sure that there are enough regulations in the way that the smaller competitor can't compete. And then Bitcoin happened. You can't buy it because it's not an it. You can't sue it because there's nowhere to sue. And the government can't regulate it out of existence because we forgot to ask their permission. And now they're faced with, in the first time in maybe 75 years of traditional financial services, with the one competitor they can't do any of those things. They haven't started panicking yet, because hubris is a pretty big mountain to overcome. But at some point they will. And some of the smart bankers are already getting that. And what they're doing is they're taking their Christmas bonus, and they're jumping ship at the end of the year, and then they're using their Christmas bonus to fund a blockchain startup in January. And I have heard this story repeatedly from former Goldman Sachs bankers and JP Morgan Chase bankers and others. The rats are already abandoning the ship. So, not worried about that.
Hi, huge fan. Thanks for coming out to Colorado.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And I apologize if I misunderstood you, but I think I heard you saying that maybe you envisioned this world where there were multiple, everyone had multiple currencies in their wallet. Sometimes maybe they wouldn't even know what was there, or they wouldn't even care. And I was kind of curious how that would develop, because maybe you don't have one coin to rule them all, but there may be one or two coins that are more efficient and more trustworthy than others. And where one is more efficient, how would it develop that you would have these other more non-efficient coins in your wallet? Why would you even have those? And also, from a human perspective, it's already difficult enough to maybe understand a handful of coins. It's almost inefficient for me to go have to study many more coins in order to just conduct, the transactions that I want to.
Very good. That's a great question. So one thing to appreciate is that money is a multidimensional thing, and the three dimensions we recognize today are store value, which is the ability of a currency to maintain value over long periods of time or appreciate in value, and can be used for very long horizon savings. Medium of exchange, which is the efficiency at which you can do transactions, especially smaller transactions, and unit of account, which is the ability of a currency to be stable in value for sustained periods of time so that you can price things in that unit. So you can use it for accounting. And these functions are distinct today. And for the most part, the way money has worked until now is you have a currency and it has an intrinsic nature to it. And that intrinsic nature imbues it with characteristics that make it better or worse in these categories. So for example, if you're using gold as money, it has certain characteristics that make it a very good store of value. And these are implicit in the chemical structure of gold. It doesn't corrode, it doesn't interact with other chemicals. It can be stored for long periods of time. It's malleable. You can form it into different shapes, et cetera, et cetera. And then it has other characteristics, like it's too bloody heavy to be used for day-to-day transactions, which make it a very poor medium of exchange. Now, these characteristics are intrinsic to the nature of gold itself. The same thing applies to paper cash and plastic credit cards and the US dollar and all of the other things we use as money. But what if there were new characteristics, and what if, instead of just taking the money we have and accepting whatever mixture of these characteristics it has, we could actually engineer them? Think of it in the terms of material sciences. You know, in the olden days, if you wanted an alloy that was made a perfect spear tip, you found which alloy had the best characteristics and used that one. Nowadays, we make one at a molecular level for the specific application, engineered to have certain properties. That is not, here it is, let's use it because it matches our needs. It's, here are our needs, let's take nature and twist it to our needs and make it do what we want. We can now do that with money. We can engineer the fundamental properties of money. So within your multi-currency wallet, there will be currencies that are better at one thing versus the other. Currencies have to make trade-offs, design trade-offs. And one of the things you'll hear from currency maximalists, especially in the cryptocurrency space, is that their currency happens to be best at everything. Right? But the truth is that the nature of currency means that almost always there are big, big design trade-offs. To be good at one thing, you're bad at another, right? Like comparing a Ferrari with an industrial tractor. Like, so which is better, a Ferrari or an agricultural tractor? Well, it very much depends on what you're trying to do. Because if what you're trying to do is bale some hay, your Ferrari's useless and expensive. But your industrial tractor, which happens to be a Lamborghini, by the way, is very good at that. Just can't go very fast. Lamborghini makes tractors, yes. That's how they started. So the bottom line is that you will have a wallet. Your wallet will probably display the value of all of the things you own in a unit that makes sense to you. Now, already, if you have a cryptocurrency wallet, what unit do you use? Anyone?
Bitcoin.
Bitcoin, millibitcoin, mbits. You're lying. You use dollars. I use dollars. I don't know how much 0.00431 Bitcoin is at any point in time. It's a shitty unit of account. Bitcoin is not a good unit of account. Units of accounts have to be stable to less than 1% for years. Bitcoin hasn't been stable to 1% for more than a minute in the last 10 years. So it's a terrible unit of account. But you might have a good unit of account. Maybe the dollar is it. I don't know. Maybe it's International Monetary Fund SDRs as the. I don't know. It doesn't matter. You can call them galactic credits for all I care. And in fact, that sounds like a joke, but I'm actually serious. An artificial unit that is not actually used for any other purpose except as a unit of account can have very stable value. And this is actually the mechanisms that they've used in places like Brazil and Argentina over the years to battle hyperinflation, which is create a completely separate currency that is not traded or paid for salaries or goods, but is only used for pricing. So we have precedent in economics with this. So imagine that all you see is a unit of account. But in the background, your wallet intelligently uses the best store of value for your big savings account and a very efficient medium of exchange currency for some of your loose coins. And then when you go and buy, your wallet negotiates with the coffee shop vendor which currencies match and picks one, maybe makes an instantaneous conversion, and sends the merchant that, which they then see on their screen in galactic credits. Again, the trick with technology is to take the complexity away and using abstraction layers to make it disappear into the background. You would not be able to use the internet if you needed to understand how BGP routing works, or how SMTP envelopes work, or what any of these funny words I'm saying are. And you don't have to, because engineers hide that complexity. So that's what I'm envisioning. And it's going to be a very different experience than what we have today, but it is very much possible. I'll take 3 more questions on this side and 2 more questions on that side, and then we'll wrap it up. Let's keep them quick now.
All right. Hi,
Speed
Andreas.
round.
How do you expect culture to change as Bitcoin becomes more widely adopted?
Fantastic question. How do I expect culture to change? There's this fantastic video clip from the late 80s, early 90s of Good Morning America, or one of these silly TV shows, and you've got all of these people sitting on a couch around there, and they're preparing to film a segment where they're going to explain the internet to other people. But they're running into one small problem, which is they have no freaking clue what it is. And this is the outtakes where you can see them discussing it, and it is absolutely hilarious. They're very famous American TV personalities who I don't personally know. And they're going, so wait, so the internet is the at thing. And the other person is, no, that's email, I think. No, I think the internet is the www thing. Does that have an at? No, it's just www and then .http. I don't know. It's something like that. And so the culture is struggling. Okay, no, I just called an American morning TV show culture, dear. But the rest of the culture was also struggling. And two things happen. This is a process of convergence. One part of convergence is that the technology gets 100 times easier to use. And the other part of convergence is that the culture gradually adapts. The people who are already of a mature age, let's say, have to learn some new words and get very confused. And that's one of the bad things about aging. Change isn't fun. And then there's a whole generation of people who are born into it, and they don't know any different. I love watching my niece interact with Windows. Not Windows 10, Windows in the house. Because when she sees glass, she goes and tries to interact with it because all of the glass in her life is responsive and always has been. So she assumes this is a property of glass, not devices. If the glass looks even slightly black, she taps it. But this is really a keen insight into the culture because what's happening is she is now living in a world where glass always responded. And here's the interesting thing. As of 2009, a whole generation of kids have been born for whom internet money always existed. And it will be normal. In fact, the best part is one day it will be boring. And that's when we know it's really mainstream.
Hi, Grant. My name is Grant from Denver. I appreciate you coming through here because we're kind of growing, as you can see, a little bit.
Yeah.
We're trying to get there.
Amazing.
Our community's ready for it, I think. I was going to ask you about privacy in general with the blockchain, and I know we have our own Zcoin or Zcash, and there's Monero and all this. Do you see a second layer protocol for Bitcoin to render those not needed, I guess, in essence? Or do you have one of those protocols that you see being the most promising to actually be able to obfuscate the keys and keep your transactions private?
That's a great question. I think privacy is probably one of the most fundamental things that needs to be done, and it needs to be done in the base protocol of Bitcoin. And it is on the roadmap, honestly. I've made some controversial statements before, and I'll make a controversial statement now, which is privacy before scaling. And the reason privacy before scaling is because you can do scaling in layer 2, and you can't do privacy in layer 2 if layer 1 isn't private. And we learned that lesson the hard way with the internet, and it has been a disaster from that perspective. IPv4 did not incorporate privacy features, and as a result, the correct economic incentives were there to turn the entire internet into a giant surveillance machine. Now, there are parts of it that are encrypted, but most of us don't use those parts. And so, as a result, we all suffer. Privacy is so important, it has to be done first. Fortunately, there's a lot of research being done in Bitcoin to do that. And Bitcoin can also benefit from some of the research that's happening in other systems. That's the beauty of a big open source ecosystem, is that we can all dip in the ideas of other teams and learn from what others are doing, if we're not too caught up in the screaming tribalism of the cryptocurrency tribes, which is one of the risks. But there's also second layer privacy technology. Lightning Network significantly improves the privacy profile of Bitcoin use. And it's also getting better. So the combination of those two technologies, I think, will give us better privacy. And furthermore, I expect we will see the second layer networks eventually become multi-currency routing networks, meaning that all of the blockchains will be connected in a higher layer so that you can move between currencies in milliseconds transparently for almost no fees or no fees at all. And at that point, the privacy currency is one swap away from the one you're using now. And it becomes very easy to be fungible. I would prefer to see privacy in every currency. In fact, I think currency without privacy is a bug. And it's a dangerous bug, which if not fixed, will have consequences. Yes?
Hey, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
So I just want to say welcome to Colorado, and really, I hope that I can impress upon you how much we want you here as a community.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm part of this growing movement here, I think. There's so many that I recognize. Specifically, we're here to shield Colorado, but also these technologies and these social movements that you're so much about. So I guess what I'm asking is, please make us a regular stop on your journeys. We'd love to have you back.
Yes.
And we believe, I think, in education, evangelism, and advocacy for all these things. And like you pointed out, we don't need it yet, but moving forward, we probably will. So what, in your opinion, is the best, most effective ways to promote, inform, and inspire adoption of these things here and then globally?
So I think one of the most important things is not to try to sell this technology to people who don't need it, and to be humble about it. I know that we all have this excitement, right? I felt it myself, which is, we've discovered this little secret, and most people don't know about it yet, and we want to tell everyone. And this happens to me regularly in my life, and nobody listens. And, well, okay, a few more people listening this time, but several previous times didn't go so well. In that enthusiasm, one of the things that happens is we risk coming across as being pushy, especially when we're excited about things like the price. Because then, and people are motivated by greed. Like, anybody who tells you they're not motivated by greed is either an alien or lying, or not aware of their own motivations. But we are all motivated by greed. It's okay to recognize that when the value of these currencies rises and we've made an investment, it's nice. I mean, it feels good. First of all, you feel personally vindicated. It's like, show these people who doubted me. They said it was a pyramid scheme, but now I'm making money. Well, guess what? Pyramid schemes make money. So if you think that's the answer, it's not a pyramid scheme. I'm making tons of money. That sounds exactly like every pyramid scheme. But at some point, many of us have this moment where we got in because we were excited or we heard about it, and maybe we got very excited about the price, but the price doesn't last, right? Eventually you get a downturn. Most people leave, and some people stay. And some people who stay read something and learn something and realize that there's more to this than just an investment. They realize that there's something else going on here, something that's meaningful and deep and important. And at that point, if you can convey that enthusiasm without being the crazy person at the party to the people who really are interested in hearing about it, and there's plenty of people who are and who need this. And if they don't, they don't. That's okay too. At the end of the day, the most important thing is basic education. And to me, one of the most important parts of basic education is teaching people how not to get scammed, robbed, or losing their money. So, teach them about scams, right? How to be critical about all of these things that are bubbling up in our space. Don't go day trading suddenly because you discovered, oh, there's not just one currency, there's 1,200 on coincap.io, and I think some of those are going to boom any second now, and I'm going to go invest in these penny stocks. Bad move, right? Protect your friends from doing that, going crazy speculation. Protect your friends from falling for pyramid schemes. There are a lot of pyramid schemes and Ponzi schemes in this space. Just in the last 2 years, we had BitConnect and OneCoin. Those have been wound up, but the next one's just round the corner, right? There are a lot of unscrupulous actors because you have a combination of money and technology, and it's promising. Educate people how not to lose their coins. Warn them about putting money permanently on exchanges or other custodial wallets in which they do not control their keys. And explain to them why that means they do not actually own any coins. Teach them how to do backups and make sure they actually do backups. Teach them how to make a plan for inheritance because things happen and maybe you want to give that gift to your family. Teach them about how to use this technology to change their own life. And that doesn't mean becoming millionaires, but it might mean becoming an expert or a teacher or a user of this technology sooner than everybody else. And so if you focus on these core education things and you avoid the temptation of all of the drama and tribalism and fear of missing out and greed, then these people will stay through each one of the cycles, and we can start building more and more community. And that works, I know, because I've seen it work for the past 5 years.
Thank you so much.
Way cool talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want you maybe to talk a little bit about what you think would be positive steps moving forward into the future. Like, how would we know that Bitcoin is succeeding? And then flip side, if there are some things that we might see in the future that should make us concerned.
Yes. Okay. So I did a talk about this topic specifically in Dublin a few months ago. It's called Measuring Success. And it's about how you really measure success in a technology like this. And to me, measuring success is about whether we can deliver the fundamental principles that Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies give us to as many people as possible without diluting those principles. So if we are able to get a decentralized, open, borderless, neutral, censorship-resistant currency, payment system, smart contract system, or whatever else to as many people as possible, we win. If instead what we give as many people as possible is a distorted version of that is controlled by a few companies with heavy controls on who can use it and when they can use it, centralized access points, white lists and blacklists, and criminal protection and safety measures added on to ensure that effectively it's Facebook coin or Fed coin or Google coin or some other perversion of this idea, that's not success. That's recreating business as usual. We already have PayPal. We already have Visa. We don't need more of that. We need something different. So success is maintaining the principles and giving the choice to as many people as possible to adopt those principles if they need them in their life, right? So a system that works for lots of people and preserves those principles. And what are the bad signs? The bad signs are when you start seeing, and you see that all the time, in fact, interested companies and interested individuals and interested governments coming and saying, for your safety, we have to make a few minor changes. We have to make sure that criminals can't use this. We have to make sure that we can control who uses this technology. We have to make the technology safer for your own good. And what do you say?
Hell no.
Fuck off, Bitcoin's fine. But they will do that in every country in the world. And we already have safe money. And the only criminals who can use that are the ones who already have a banking license. And we want to go away from that. All right, last question over there?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Andreas. This has been great. And my name's Russell, and I started a company to do non-custodial stuff for merchants so they can accept payments.
Great.
And I find that in the sort of Bitcoin-friendly space that we have here, you've got people skew either towards the hodlers that are in for investments and the crypto commerce people, which I sort of skew towards. What can you, and I find myself going up against the hodlers who own all this Bitcoin could very easily be spending a little bit of it and make the whole area, the whole space a lot more open. What do you say to them, if anything, to get them to be a little more open about maybe spending a little bit of their Bitcoin on commerce to move the space further?
I don't say anything to them. The market is telling you that the current preference for this technology in this country and in other developed countries is as a political store value hedge against inflation and other geopolitical effects. That's what the market is telling you. Now, if you're in business of doing commerce and the market is telling you that right now it isn't a very useful system of commerce, and the reason it isn't a very useful system of commerce comes down to two things. One, we already have useful systems of commerce, right? We already have credit cards, and we have PayPal, and we have all of these technologies that we can use to do commerce. And they're very easy to use. And most of us have them, have access to these technologies. Which means that in order for Bitcoin to be better than those technologies, it has to be significantly enough better to justify the steep learning curve, the difficulty and security, and all of the other things we don't have to worry about. And I could tell you all day that it is, and the market is telling you that it isn't. So believe the market. If the market is telling you that Bitcoin is not sufficiently better than Visa for an American to use to buy a cup of coffee, that is because it isn't. And that's okay. Why? Because there are 4 billion people in the world who don't even have access to that. And they will do something much more important than buy a cup of coffee, right? They're going to buy some freedom with it in a country where they can't even imagine that happening. The fact that Bitcoin encourages holding, or hoarding, as it's called by mainstream American economists, or savings, as it's called by rational people, is because implicitly people recognize that the published inflation rate today is not the real inflation rate. So the published inflation rate today is what? 2.8% today, excluding housing, energy, food, and healthcare. So as long as you don't eat, breathe, live, or get sick, 2.8%. The bottom line is that people implicitly feel that there is inflation in many parts of our lives that is much greater than that. And when they feel that, they take preventive measures. They look at various places they could invest their money, and they consider Bitcoin as one of them, and they invest in that. So the reason you're not able to get e-commerce working is because it's not right. It's not the right time. The technology is not ready for it. And more importantly, the technology is already serving a goal that the market considers more important. And that doesn't mean that Bitcoin can only be store of value. It just means that it's more useful as a store of value here than it is elsewhere. And in the future, it may play other roles, and in different demographics, in different economic environments, it will play other roles. But right now, that's where we are. So as an entrepreneur, listen to the market, right? It's okay. If it's not the right time yet, find something else to do with this space for which there is the right time. Sorry, I can't give you a better answer.
Oh, that's a good answer. Thanks.
All right. And with that, we're done with the Q&A. Thank you so much.